Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi, and in today's video we're going to be looking at a cookie policy related to Reebok. Now, when I was growing up, Reebok was a very popular brand. I don't know how popular they are today, but we're going to be reviewing their cookie policy. Now, what's very interesting is this is the second time during one of my audits that I've been presented with a pop-up that indicates the viewing of a website page like this cookie policy not being applicable in the United States. Now, I'm very interested in why some organizations have decided to make a distinction between a cookie policy in the European Union and in the United States, because data protection laws in the United States also recognize cookies to be personal data. Now, we're going to stay on the European webpage because I don't know if we're going to have access to the cookie policy if we change it to the US. So I'm going to stay on this page, and it looks like this is for, let's just click the Netherlands. I am accessing this site in the United States, and it may be that that influences whether or not a cookie banner is presented as I interact with this site. Now, I've mentioned this before in other audits and reviews, that ultimately the process in which an organization like Reebok has to follow in its compliance with data protection laws is different from geography to geography. Now, I just saw that they don't deliver to the United States. It appears that Reebok is something that is European Union centric. Now, I find that to be very interesting. I'm pretty sure that Reebok does sell in the United States, but that would be something that I would check up on if I was their privacy counsel. The reason why that's important to know is because whenever the thresholds that are applicable for an organization on whether they meet this threshold for a specific data protection law is going to vary based on where their products and services are provided. Now, I think it was interesting to see that disclaimer that Reebok doesn't deliver to the United States. That does not necessarily mean they don't sell their products and services to the United States. But the reason that's influential from a data protection standpoint is because if it is in fact that Reebok does not sell its shoes in the United States, it may be that it does not process personal data in the United States, and as such, it will not meet the threshold for processing personal data in the United States. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but I will say that that's the second time that I have seen that type of pop-up as it relates to the cookie policy. Something tells me that if the Reebok site is accessed from the United States, that this cookie policy doesn't appear to users of that URL. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but that would be something that I would review for my clients to make sure that they're able to meet their obligations if they do meet the threshold in the United States. Let's get to the cookie policy. So I'm just going to scroll to the bottom and see if they've provided the day that this was last updated or is effective. That's really important. Now, what's very interesting about this cookie policy is that date has not been provided. That would be something that would be very instrumental, and I will tell you why. The minute I saw that there were necessary cookies and technical cookies, they've got analytic cookies. Now, let me explain something to you that happens on the back end for most organizations. The relationship that an organization has with some of the third-party cookies often evolves regularly. Now, I don't know the period in which it's generally evolving, but what generally happens is on the back end, from an IT perspective, the types of cookies that are offered on a site generally change, which is why it's really important for a cookie policy to reflect what's actually happening at an organization. And when organizations don't put the date that it was last effective, there is implicit understanding that some of the information that they're putting as representations on their site may be outdated. Under the data protection laws, companies have obligations to be transparent about what's happening when it comes to personal data. Having outdated insights on your website could be seen as problematic with a regulator, as they generally are the ones that measure how an organization is doing, and they're the ones that are responsible for enforcement actions for organizations that don't comply with data protection laws. So there is no date here, so I find that to be something that is a bit concerning. But that being said, let's take a look at this policy. I like that they've put a definition of what constitutes a cookie. Generally, most consumers aren't familiar with what constitutes a cookie. They may also be wondering, why exactly would Reebok even have a cookie policy? The reason is because a cookie constitutes personal data. Now, I don't know if the rest of this policy outlines that fact, but one of the reasons for any consumers watching that you are seeing a cookie policy is because cookies constitute personal data. And as such, companies need to be transparent about their practices when it comes to personal data. And then they need to provide you notice that it's even being processed as you interact with the site. So we see some necessary cookies and we can see the lifespan. The reason this is really important to identify is the fact that no personal data should be kept indefinitely. It's really important for organizations anytime there is an identifier associated with an individual to have a date in which it's deleted permanently. That's definitely a foundational concept in privacy protection land. So there's also analytical cookies. This is very interesting. This is probably going to be something that I talk about for a couple minutes. Based on your consent, okay? We can also use analytics cookies for tracking the products you put into your basket, remind you to complete the purchase. Now, the reason I've highlighted this is because we weren't presented with any type of cookie banner as we landed on this site. So I technically have not given my consent for analytic cookies to track the products I've put into my basket. I think it's very interesting that this cookie policy doesn't have a date in which it was last effective. And in addition to that, we weren't presented with a banner to manage our preference center and or give our consent. Now, I would be intrigued, and if this would be of interest to you, I think in the future what I'm going to do is potentially go onto the actual website and test the theory, put something in my cart, and then provide you guys with feedback as to whether I got targeted related to me putting black trainers or gym and training shoes into my cart, and whether or not it is in fact that analytic cookies are not being collected as I navigate the website, because I haven't given my consent. Now, generally when I do these reviews, I just look at the actual policy documents, so I don't really get targeted, but I'm planning to do an experiment in the future. When I interact with sites, I'm going to put something in my cart, and then we're going to see if I start getting targeted ads related to how I interact with these websites, because what that means is that I haven't been provided the opportunity to give my consent to these organizations. They're using analytical cookies without obtaining my consent, and then they're targeting to me, which is not in line with the data protection laws, right? I don't know that for a fact. We weren't presented with a cookie banner. I'm going to scroll to the bottom and see if there is the opportunity to manage my cookies. Oh my goodness, wow. The data controller of data collected by cookies, okay, is GB Brands with a registered office in. Now, we don't have a registered office. Now, that's interesting. Wow. For any information regarding the processing of your personal data to complain and to exercise the rights set out below, you can contact the data controller via email to GB Brands, okay, they've not provided an email, at the attention of they've left it blank, which is appointed to receive and manage such requests, also involving the relevant department, as per the internal procedures of GB Brands. Now, I'm really glad my eye caught this, because there's actually no way in which consumers can exercise their rights. You've not provided an email, and you've not provided who it is to the attention of. Now, organizations, especially those operating in the European Union, have to fulfill data subject access requests. I think it's very interesting we have no address. I'm going to scroll to the top and see this GB Brands. Okay, so they have provided the name of the controller, that's good, but we don't have a way to fulfill data subject access requests. And these are little details that someone like myself, a privacy lawyer, would be able to articulate for organizations that really want to be able to comply with the data protection laws. Every single sentence that an organization places on their website is basically them giving insight into their consumers about what's happening within the organization. And European Union residents should have the opportunity to exercise their data subject access requests. And we just took a look at the provision in this section about the data controller, and there's no insight to be found on how to contact the data controller. That's missing. So that would need to be updated. Okay. In this partnership, GB Brands Europe BV, which manages Reebok's e-commerce operations in Europe, Dresslife acts as the data processor, processing data on behalf of GB Brands to generate personalized fashion recommendations for Reebok. I'm intrigued as to why they've put insights into the processor here, and what does it have to do with the cookies? I really hope you enjoyed this simple review of this cookie policy. I think there's definitely a lot of updates that could be made. Generally, a privacy counsel is going to go through this with you in detail to make sure you're complying as of today, because what Reebok is currently saying is this is what's happening right now. And we can see that consumers don't even have the opportunity to address their data subject access requests per this page. And that could be really problematic from a data protection obligation standpoint. Now, it's interesting that they've provided an email address for Dresslife, but not for the actual controller, which is GB Brands. There's a lot that's going on here, so I think that this definitely needs additional clarification, definitely. But I hope you enjoyed this review. If you want any insight into other cookie policies I've reviewed or cookie notices, take a look at my channel and I'll see you in another review.